So we're going to cover some weed control issues in ornamental plantings. We're going to touch a little bit on control in the lawn, and we are also going to talk a little bit about perennial weed control and weed control in vegetable garden settings. So Greg and I are going to be, hitting each other back and forth on these issues. Natalie, do we want Greg to go ahead and introduce himself, or what do we want to do?
Yeah, I say let's go ahead and let Greg introduce himself and give us a shot from Cumberland County, and then you guys can kind of tag team as you present.
Okay.
Okay. Well, hello everyone. This is Gregg Church. I'm the ag agent in Cumberland County, up on the plateau, and a beautiful day here on the plateau. And I'm going to be just a little bit different from what Celeste is talking about. I'm going to talk a little bit more about orchards, vineyards you can see behind me, talk a little bit, and we've got some blueberries here, and do a little bit of compare and contrast. And I'm actually going to talk to you, a little bit more about that vegetation control when we get into, looking at things beyond just the landscape. Now, one thing I do want to say just right off the bat, that while I'm going to be talking about herbicides and talk about burn down type programs that we're trying to control vegetation, the one thing that I want to tell everybody, most importantly, before you even start thinking about killing weeds, I want you focusing on growing plants. Now that may sound a little bit contradictory, but maybe as we get into it and I explain just a little bit more about some of the chemistries and things in controlling weeds, it doesn't do any good to control weeds if you've not got those desirable plants in your garden and things. You got to basically have a purpose for trying to control those weeds rather than just trying to kill weeds. So I want it to be a bigger part of an overall program. Primarily, that bigger part is growing desirable plants.
Awesome. Thanks, Greg, for introducing that portion of our discussion today. And so I guess I'm just going to jump right in there. I do want to preface this with saying that I do not have any, equipment. I'm just holding my cell phone and walking around the garden. So I'm going to try to move my screen real slowly. I'm going to swap the view around, so you're mostly going to be seeing the weeds and plants that I'm talking about. And occasionally I will swap it back over to me if we need to have a little bit of discussion about a certain topic. So here we go. I'm just going to flip my screen around, and I think I am. Share content. There we go. Okay, so as you can see, we're on the side of my house over where my unit is. And this is the side that doesn't get quite as much attention with weeding. I kind of had a weeding spree a few weekends ago, so the other areas of my gardens are a little sparser when I got over to this ugly side, which I really haven't filled out yet as far as plantings. So I just is good. Can you all tell what we're looking at? I hope so. Greg, can you chime in and tell me yes, that it looks good, or no? It does. Okay,
it
good.
It looks fantastic.
So what we're looking at right here, just starting out with a few basics. I'm sure everybody's familiar with this plant, and to many, it may not be a weed. So to many, this may not be to determine if a plant is a weed or not. And a lot of that has to do with, is it in a desirable place? Is this where I want this plant to be growing? And in this particular situation, I don't mind it being here right at this moment, but for all intensive purposes, no, I do not want clover sprouting up all over my manicured ornamental beds. But to others, that may not be an issue, and that is fine. But today is all about education, so I want to help you all to be able to identify some of these weedy plants or
Hey.
plants that could be considered weeds.
Celeste,
Yeah.
if I could jump in very
Yes.
quickly and talk about, a lot of times when I talk with homeowners, you know, they get that question about I've got clover in my lawn and I want to get rid of it. Or, you know, clover is one of those things that the first thing that I think about when I see it really rampant in a turf is the fact that it's probably a sign of low fertility in your lawn and landscape, because Ladina clover is one of those that can really survive droughty conditions, really low fertility conditions, and it'll thrive. And so a lot of times while you're worried about controlling that weed, you know, and like she says, some people see this weed as a beef producer. I like seeing that growing in my pasture fields. So it's in the eyes of the beholder, but a lot of times it's a indicator of fertility issues when you see a lot of white clover in those landscapes.
Awesome. Thanks, Greg, for adding that commentary in there. So I just want to get up close so you can see. Obviously, clovers have these trifoliate leaves. They're joined there in the middle. You're going to have 3 leaves. This is a white clover, Ladina clover, if you will. So it's got the white blooms. There are also some red clovers. And then there are some plants out there that look like clover, but aren't. And here is one of those growing right next to it. So you can see it also has that trifoliate leaf arrangement. Let me get my fingers underneath it so you can see what I'm talking about right here. And these leaves are more heart-shaped. If you saw in the other clovers, they weren't heart-shaped. Here's one of their leaves. It's just a kind of a fat oval type situation. So this could be mistaken, easily mistaken for a clover, but it is not. And I want to show you a bloom. I'm crawling around on the ground, y'all. I wish you could see me. I wish somebody had a video of me right now. And
We're getting you cutting in and out a little bit, Celeste.
yellow.
Celeste has truly gone military there. She's
Vernacular
low
weed
crawling
issue,
so low
and
that she's
that
lost
is
the
not
signal.
where I want this plant. Ooh. Yeah. Okay. So maybe it will be better now. I'll try to stand up. I was laying down so that y'all can see that picture really well. So that's our introduction. Now we're gonna move on to a few others. So if a weed is growing right now, it's probably what we would call a cool season weed. So it's sprouted possibly last fall or early, or I guess late winter, and is thriving right now in these cooler conditions. Our warm season weeds have not, well, some of them probably have begun to germinate, but that's not our main issue now. Maybe we need to have another weed talk later when we get into those warmer months. But what we're looking at right here, again, another familiar weed. I'm sure you all have seen this in your gardens. This is dandelion. And I wonder how many of you, if this flower were not here, this yellow flower, if this wasn't here, how many of you would be able to identify that plant without the bloom on it? And that is really what we're trying to get at, because control for dandelion is so important, especially before the blooms have formed, because they quickly go from that cute little yellow flower to this seed head that's going to blow thousands of seeds all around your garden and will germinate if they find a favorable place and are exposed to light. And I'm glad that we're looking at dandelion now, because you remember those things that I talked about. What are some things that make plants a weed? One aspect of plants that could make them be considered weedy is their ability to produce numerous seeds and have several different ways to spread themselves about and ensure their persistence in our gardens. And we definitely have that when we're talking about dandelions. There's probably, I don't know, several hundred seeds on that one bloom. So it's important for us to do a little control. Let me walk around and see what else we can find. I want to do a little comparison between two commonly confused weeds. And I mean, it's not a super big deal that you know the difference, but it's, you know, important just for us to have this knowledge, because both of these weeds are going to be controlled the same way. What we're looking at right now is purple dead nettle. I hope you all can hear me. I hope I'm not cutting out. I'm laying down again. So what we're looking at right here is purple dead nettle. I'm just going to turn this around so you can get a good view of it. A lot of people get purple dead nettle confused with henbit, and rightly so, because they both have purple blooms and they both have square stems. I'm going to try to get up as closely as I can. And I'm going to roll this stem in my fingers. There's one side, there's the second side, there's the third side, there's the fourth side. So it definitely has a square stem. You just roll that in your finger, and that is going to help you be able to make sure that you are identifying these plants correctly. Both purple dead nettle and henbit have square stems because they're both in the mint family. They are closely related, and that's probably why they look so similar. But a few tips on being able to tell the difference between the two, just so that, you know, we look like we know what we're talking about when we're helping people control weeds, is let's look at the leaf of this purple dead nettle right here. I'm gonna just bear with me while I hold my phone and try to pull these leaves back. Okay, can you see how this leaf is attached to a petiole? It's like a little bitty stem that's attached to the leaf. Is that blurry, Natalie? Can you tell me, is this blurry or is this clear?
It is a little bit blurry. In fact, if you might want to back up just a little bit from it.
Okay. Well, that's better, probably.
Yeah.
Okay. I wonder if I can I want to make it so that I don't see everybody else. I want to see my screen so that I can actually see what I'm showing you guys. I wonder how I do that, Natalie.
I don't know if we might be able to to check speaker view as well.
I'm just not sure where to do that at. Hold on one second, guys.
Yeah, I don't know that she can do that. I think you've just got either speaker view or gallery view.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, we'll just move along then, and I'll try to get the pictures as clear as I can. So,
Hey,
you can see,
this is
yes?
I think you can pin a video up in the top right-hand corner. You might be able to pin a video and just be yours, or
Top right-hand corner. Well, this helps me anyway. So I'll do it in gallery view, and at least the picture's bigger anyway. So this is helping me out. Now I can see what y'all are seeing a little better.
That's pretty clear right there.
Okay, good. So if you look right here where my pointer finger is, there's a little petiole. That's like a little baby stem that's attached to the base of the leaf that actually connects it to the plant, okay? And so that is going to be one of our identifying factors for being able to tell the difference between henbit and purple dead nettle. This one is purple dead nettle, don't forget. Also, the leaves have a tendency to be tinged with purple. You see the leaves here at the top, how they have a little bit of purple color to them. Now, once you get on, that's not always the case. If you look at the base of the plant, you can clearly see that these leaves here are green and do not have that purple tinge. But as you get closer to the terminal growth point there, they have a little more purple tinge to them. So luckily for me, I have a specimen of henbit right here beside me. So I'm just going to shift over a little bit. There we go. And this one isn't in bloom yet. Sorry for that, but you can see how it is going to have purple little blooms. You can see them budding out there at the top of that terminal end right there. And the leaves generally aren't tinged in purple like the purple dead nettle is. So that's, you know, one way in my head I always try to remember is if the leaves are tinged purple, the name of the plant has purple in it, okay? Because it's tricky. Sometimes I just randomly forget which one is which. And so I'm trying to teach y'all a couple little tricks. Also, when we look at how the leaf is attached to the stem, okay, can you see this right here where that leaf, let me get my other finger in here, where the leaf is attached to the stem, there is no petiole. The leaf is directly attached to the stem right there, okay? Directly attached. And it kind of, to me, resembles like a little, like a fountain, you know, if you will, how the leaf attaches to the stem and comes out and kind of cascades back down. So that's pretty different from, let's look at them right beside each other. Man, a tripod would be really nice right now. So when they're side by side, we can tell, we can see the big difference in how the leaf is actually attached to the stem and what it looks like right there. So this one right here is purple dead nettle because the leaves are purple. Remember, they have a petiole. And this one right here is henbit. The leaves are attached directly to the stem, but they do both have purple blooms and they do both have square stems. So, moving right along. Let's see if we can go find some chickweed in the garden because I know that's an issue for folks and I'm almost positive that I have some. And here is some right here. So, this isn't the biggest specimen, but we can make do with it. So, we're looking at these leaves. They're kind of an oval shaped with a pointy tip on them. They aren't really a shiny leaf, but they are a bright green, and they have a small little white daisy-like bloom on them. So this is what the bloom looks like. And then here are the seed, well, as it's becoming ready to bloom right here. So hope you all can see that. So chickweed and henbit and purple dead nettle are all cool season annuals. Annuals mean they complete their life cycle in 1 year, but sometimes they can be the most numerous in our gardens because they do reseed themselves so readily. But the good thing is that they're easy to pull out because they have shallow root systems. Most annual weeds are going to have that shallow, fibrous root system. Oh, let me pull one of these out so you can see. It's very easy to pull out of the garden. You don't have to worry about them coming back from the root. We've pulled that out. That plant is done. Doesn't mean you're not going to have more germinate, but easy to pull, shallow root system. Now I want to show you that is not the case for dandelions. Many people think that dandelions are in fact annuals, but they are not. They're perennials, and I'm going to show you one way that you can tell. So I'm going to dig this little baby up here. If you've ever tried to pull a dandelion out of the ground and all you got were leaves, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Look how deep and long and thick this taproot is. Dandelions are actually perennials. So they could be reseeding themselves, sprouting up, say, you know, in a few weeks. And if you don't remove them from the garden or the landscape, they're going to stay there. No, that same plant will come back next year to do the same process all over. So it's super important that we try to control these before they spread their wealth all over our gardens. Okay, let's see what else we can find. We'll do a few more weed IDs and then we'll talk about controlling weeds. Oh, here's a good one. Natalie, correct me, but I always call this wild carrot.
Yeah, I think that may be one of the common names. There's a lot of those in that family.
Yes. So, again, this is not an annual. These are generally biennials, which is disheartening. That means that it germinated last fall. and now it's been growing all winter. But you can see here it has a pretty substantial taproot to it as well, but pretty easy to remove from the garden. It has this ferny foliage. It could be mistaken if you do a lot of seeding in your garden where you're growing a Queen Anne's lace or the false Queen Anne's lace that has those like purple tinged blooms, Daca, I can't remember what the species name is. It could be mistaken for this. So let's just be aware, know where you see it so that you don't mistake them for weeds. I've done that many times. Pulled up a bunch of seedlings that I thought were weeds when they weren't. Let's see. How about Poa Anna? So this area right here, you can see I have a lot of parsley that reseeded itself from this little patch over here. So I'm trying to let it do its thing, and I missed this little clump of Poa Anna, or annual bluegrass right there. So it grows in little bitty clumps. It's green, and it has these, I keep saying cute little inflorescences, but they're kind of like silvery. Like if you saw a big patch of Poa Anna growing all together, you would say, oh, that has a nice little silver seed head on the top of it. Again, these are easy to pull out. It's an annual weed. They've got a really fibrous root system. You can see that right here. But the issue comes where it reseeds itself. Remember how we said weeds have all those numerous seed heads and so many ways of replicating themselves. And if you allow this to go unchecked, what you'll end up with is a mat of Poa Anna that will not be easy to remove, because as you take it out, you're removing all this good soil and dirt from your garden. Here's some more chickweed, like we saw a minute ago. All right, and anything else? Let me see if there's anything else around here that we haven't talked about already. Oh, I thought I had some wild geranium over here that I left on purpose, but I don't see it.
You know, Celeste, as you pan the camera around there a time or two, I noticed that nice dormant lawn that you have as well. Looks like your Bermuda grass is still pretty dormant.
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up. We can talk about that a little bit while we're here.
Which is going to be a nice comparison to this nice green oasis of mine back behind me.
Yes, so I do have Bermuda that's beginning to come out. You may be able to see it better when I angle the camera in this direction. But the reason mine is so far behind is because we do quite a bit of weed control management with our lawn. My husband, it doesn't really matter to me, but he really likes to have a nice, clean Bermuda lawn. So about a month and a half ago, before the Bermuda started coming out of dormancy, we sprayed it with glyphosate, a rate of, I believe it's like 3 ounces. I'm sorry, there's a tractor going by, so it's getting kind of loud. Y'all want to see it? Hey! Oh, that's Granddaddy. So, yeah, we treated this with glyphosate just to clean up a lot of those annual cool season weeds. And we also, you can tank mix that with the pre-emerge. There's several different ones available. We generally use pendimethalin as the active ingredient. And Prowl H2O is going to be your brand that has a label for turf. There's also a product called Pendulum that you can buy at farm supply stores. It has that same active ingredient. You'll need to read the labels just to make sure if that is actually labeled for turf or not. So that's why my lawn looks so far behind, because it did get kicked a little bit in the behind when we used the Roundup. Later in our presentation, if I make it over to my dad's house, who lives right beside me, there's a a good area. He skipped a line when we were spraying, and you can really tell the difference and see that one strip that he missed, and how much benefit we actually get from using those pre-emerge and early post-emerge options to keep our lawns nice and clean. But it's not too far behind. It'll catch up in a week or so. I'm just glad I'll have one less week of mowing than everybody else does. So, okay.
Hey, Celeste, if you want to share with folks what some of your favorite resources are, I can put a few links in the chat.
Oh, yeah, great. I'm glad you reminded me about that. I forgot. So I sent Natalie a Word document that had several different resources on there for you all to be able to use once you leave this meeting. Let me swap it around so you can see me for a minute. Okay. And so I'll just talk you through a few of those. So I attached 2 websites. Those are the first 2 on the page. The first one is our UT Turf Weeds website, and it is awesome. It has picture IDs. You can go into that database where it says, well, there's a tab at the top of the page that says Weed ID. You can click on it. You can narrow the search by selecting either grassy weed or broadleaf weed. And so, take out half of the options that you have to look through. And there are tiles that have pictures of each weed. So you can just scroll down there through those pictures till you see something that you think resembles whatever this weed is. You found a weed, you don't know what it is, you want a little more information. You can scroll down through those pictures. If you see one that looks like your weed, just hover over it with your mouse and the tile will flip over and kind of give you a brief overview of it. From there, if you think that's your plant, go ahead and click on that tile and it will open up a window that has like 5 or 6 pictures from different angles. It'll have pictures of the bloom, up close pictures of the foliage, and we'll have detailed descriptions about the plant's life cycle, leaf structure, and things of that nature that will help you put that plant through a key if it comes to that. But hopefully by that point, you can pretty much guarantee the weed that you're looking at is the one that you're trying to identify. And then conveniently from that same window, there's a link. And the link says Mobile Weed Manual. And if you click on that, it automatically takes you to another site called the Mobile Weed Manual. That's also through the University of Tennessee. That's your second link that's on that Word document. So you can go directly to Mobile Weed Manual. Say you already know what the weed is and you want to know how to kill it. That's what the Mobile Weed Manual's for, is to provide you a resource for figuring out what you can use to combat that weed, okay? So go to the Mobile Weed Manual. I really like it. You can use it on a desktop and it works perfectly, but I love it because it was made specifically to function on mobile devices. So if you go to the site on your phone or iPad, whatever you're using, you can save that homepage of the Mobile Weed Manual directly to your home screen, and it's going to function as an app from there on out. It's not an app, it's a website, so it's not taking up, your data space and all that. But you can just click on it directly from your home page and it'll take you there. From here, you'll see once you get in there and start playing around with it, you can again tell it, are you looking for treatment in turf, or are you trying to treat this weed in ornamental planting? Then from there you can select what the weed is, and from there it will give you control options, and those options are color coordinated. Bright green means it has excellent control, 90 to 100%. Light green is good control, so 80 to 90. And then it goes down from there, yellow, red, and then there's often several options that are colored gray. That means that particular weed is labeled for use in that area, but we don't have any university research data as far as its efficacy and control goes. So those are some cool, web-based resources that I always like to tell people about and share with them, because I use them daily. to help people with weeds, and I think that you will find those helpful as well. Before I move on, I found that wild geranium I wanted to show to y'all. Can you see that? I don't know if you could see that. Let me swap my camera over. Crap.
Yeah, that was coming in reasonably clear.
Oh, it was? Okay, sorry. Getting a little frustrated right there. Okay, so here we go. And as you can see, I mean, it looks like the leaves of some of our perennial geraniums that we have that sometimes we use as ground covers, low-growing herbaceous perennials. But this one is a weed, and I don't want him in there. I'm taking him out. And I just want to give you an up close of the leaf. I only left him there so I could show him to y'all. So now that we've gone through and identified some of the common weed issues that we may have in ornamental planting, I want to talk to you a little bit about some methods of control and what we can do to help ourselves out. Because if you're like me, after a couple hours of weeding, my back is not feeling too great. And so I like to, when I approach this issue, I like to kind of go on a 4-step process for myself. So my first line of defense, as I'm sure many of you are familiar, is the oldest form of weed removal, hand weeding. Get out there on your hands and knees, and we want to get these beds, these areas, as clean as possible before we start to implement some of these weed control measures, okay? So just get out there, pull those weeds, try to get all the roots. It's important that you do it before they go to flower, just like we discussed with the dandelions and many of these other troublesome weeds. So after we get them cleaned out to the best of our ability, my second line of defense is always mulch. And there are so many options out there for mulch, for control of weeds. And you might say, well, which one is better than the other? Well, to me, this is going to be your personal preference, whatever works best for you in your particular situation. I like to use hardwood mulch in my landscape beds. I just think it looks really natural. I don't necessarily live like in a wooded type area. I don't use pine needles just because I don't have anywhere to collect those. So I like to use hardwood mulch. And the key to using any kind of mulch is that you get excellent coverage. The goal of using mulch is to prevent sunlight from getting to those weed seeds. Many of these seeds, I'm sure you're familiar with like crabgrass, for example, they require sunlight in order for them to germinate. And if you don't give them that sunlight, then they're never going to pop up. They're just not going to initiate that process. So we really want to get a good 2 to 3 inch layer of mulch for it to be effective at blocking out that sun. And I'm sure that you guys could tell from when I was showing my beds, I do not have at this very moment 2 to 3 inches of mulch. You can see here I've got a lot of dirt that's exposed. That's because I dug that plant up and I moved it from somewhere else last week. And as I mentioned before, I grow a lot of things from seed, and so I don't really want to have a heavy mulch cover at the beginning of the spring because I want my seedlings to emerge. So I push that mulch back. I plant my seedlings. I think this is deal coming up right here, and then I just cover it back up with a little bit of mulch. Now once my seedlings really get going, I will come back through here and put a thicker layer of mulch down to help me with weed control for the rest of the season. But in the beginning, I don't want to do that. I want to show you another area where that's the same situation. Right here, I've got tons and tons of that annual euphorbia, frost on the mountain, I think is what it's called. And it's popping up. It has a really big seed. And so it came up right through the mulch. I didn't even have to pull that back. But that is not something that I direct seeded on purpose. I just let it go to seed itself each year, and it always comes back up in this area. So keep that in mind. For good weed control, the backbone of any weed control options in ornamental planting are going to be manual removal, good mulch coverage, and then our third option, or line of defense, if you will, are pre-emerge control options. Again, I start a lot of things from seed, so I don't start out with an early application of pre-emerge, but I will come in and put down a pre-emerge granular once the majority of my seedlings have come up. And I, of course, will not put those down in the areas where I want to seed warm season plants. Like right here in the front of this bed, I usually seed some, I usually put out some Zahara zinnias, the little short ones, and then big, tall, cut and come again zinnias. Other areas I do cosmos. And so obviously I won't put pre-emerge down in these areas because I don't.
I went ahead and shared the ornamental weed control link, and we did have a question actually about applying pre-emerge. So, that's
okay.
I also wanted to tell you that it's about 20 till 12 right now.
Oh, no. Okay. I'll wrap mine up, and then I'll let Greg talk.
Okay.
I knew that I would go too long. So as far as, what's the question for treating with pre-emerge?
It was just a little bit about, what some of the general protocols are. I mean, you were talking about granular. You might want to talk about spray versus granular, what some of the options are for pre-emergence.
Okay, yes. So in my situation, I prefer to use granulars when we're talking about ornamental plantings, permanent ornamental plantings. I most often use, the active ingredient in it is called trifluralin. Brand names for that are Treflan or even Preen. Now be careful because Preen has several product lines and not all of them. The active ingredient, all of them, is not Treflan, so be careful when you're doing that. Is not trifluralin, so just make sure you're looking for that active ingredient. Also, be aware that most of your pre-emerge granules either require, and liquid pre-emerge options as well, either require incorporation or rain/irrigation within a certain amount of time before they are activated. So I do not incorporate my granular Treflan because I like to put it on after I have my my good 2 to 3 inch layer of mulch down. So I'm not going to disturb that and expose the soil again. So I put it down before a rain is expected, or I irrigate it in with about 1/2 inch of water to activate that and get it going in the landscape. There are some other options for pre-emerge. We can use Pendulum, has some activity and is labeled for some use with ornamentals. Barricade is another option. I know several people who have perennial beds that use Snapshot. Ron Star is another one. But the thing with these is, and I know we don't have time to cover each of them in depth, but you need to read the label very closely because some of them require that you put them on underneath the mulch versus on top of the mulch. So for example, Ron Star must be applied on top of the mulch for it to be activated. Sunlight activates it. Whereas Barricade must be applied under mulch. Sunlight will degrade that chemical and not allow it to work as well as it could. So I hope I've answered some questions about pre-emerge. And if we miss the window with manual removal, mulch, and pre-emerge, all we're left with are post-emerge options, and those are few and far between. However, we do have a great guide that you can use for post-emerge options, and Natalie is going to share that one in the chat box as well. It's a publication from UT. I believe it's called Common Herbicides for Use in Ornamental Plantings, and they outline many of these post-emerge and pre-emerge options that you can use in the landscape. And from there, I'll be quiet and I'll let Greg talk. Y'all have heard me long enough.
All right, thanks, Celeste. We're gonna pass the mic over to the proverbial mic over to the plateau. Are you ready, Greg?
Okay, in the last 2 minutes, Celeste, just
I'm
want to
so
talk
sorry.
to.
Why didn't somebody say something? Y'all should have told me.
You're having so much fun.
A lot of great information there, and I'm kind of like Rachel or one of them. We need a daily video of Celeste low crawling her lawn. I think we could get 1 million likes. Now, a couple of things I want to talk to you about. First and foremost, I said this in the very beginning. When I start talking about weed control, I don't focus on weed control first. Basically, I would encourage all homeowners to focus on growing plants first. Grow plants, you know. I don't know how much you can see kind of looking back in behind me at, this is at my mom's home here, and a couple of things that I've got her to do is just, number one, just raise her mowing deck. And the fact that we're mowing that grass now for this cool season turf, we mow it when it reaches about 4.5 inches, and we keep it somewhere between 4 and 4.25 inches. And as a result, my mom coming out, and she was walking the other day while I was out here working in the vineyard, and she's like, I can't hardly walk in this stuff. It's like this big, dense carpet. And so getting that grass taller and a lot more dense makes it a much better competitor. So focusing just on maintenance of lawn, that is my number one. There isn't a close second weed control measure. Is a good, tall, dense, healthy stand of turf grass with good soil nutrition. Now, when I have to start going to chemistry, and some of the times in different settings, whether it be a lawn, whether it's our blueberries, or back over here my shoulder looking at the grapes, you know, we may have to rely on some chemistry to get rid of problematic weeds. Now, some of you, Celeste mentioned a couple of them, your chickweed here, your wild garlic or wild onions, same plant, or maybe one that tends to be a little more problematic, wild violets. I can't hardly get the leaf out here. Wild violets that maybe that you can see, and kind of the color back through the turf behind me, you can see a little bit of those wild violets kind of trying to creep into the yard. Most of these weeds I pulled out of a garden spot that basically was tilled last year, and so disturbed soil, weeds were allowed to grow. Now, a couple of things. If Natalie would have put in a PowerPoint presentation, I sent her a program yesterday that had a snapshot of my front lawn. I've got more of these broadleaf weeds growing in my turf than I actually have turf. And to me, in that setting, you know, I don't care whether I have wild violets or whether I have chickweed or wild onions. It makes no difference. And to me, I leave it alone. And I understand how a lot of people want that perfectly manicured turf and things like that. But I would tell those people, first start with your plant nutrition, proper management skills, keeping that turf grass up and dense. Now, when we start looking at specialty crops and trying to control things that say maybe you've got a lawn and you're wanting it a little bit more pristine and you're doing a good job with your grass, but maybe you do have some problematic wild violets and things like that that are showing up in your lawn. Before we start using chemistry to control those, there's a couple of things that we need to focus on and we need to understand. One, Celeste mentioned, and she talked about the annuals, okay? The chickweed, is that annual there? You know, it comes back year after year from a seedling. The wild violet is a perennial. It'll come back from seeds, but it'll also come back from roots. Now, why is that important? The main reason for understanding what the plant is and having an idea of how that plant's growing is going to weigh very, very, very heavily on how we go about killing those and the herbicides that we use to control those. Now, when I see chickweed and people bring it into my office and I see all those pretty flowers and they want it identified and they want to know how to control it, well, first of all, I ask them, if you killed it, will you have any yard left? And, you know, 9 out of 10, so they say, well, it's killing my grass out. Well, something else was impacting that grass probably before the chickweed came in. The chickweed was just opportunistic and started to grow. But the point I'm getting at is whenever I start seeing it and I see all those flowers growing on that plant, as an annual, I know that this plant has already entered that sexual reproductive phase. Some of them have got flowers, some of them's got seedlings. And so with that signal, that's not going to be a good time to try and control these. On the wild violet, I'm seeing that kind of bloom and I'm thinking, well, it's done in terms of doing its thing as well. Not entirely. So when I start thinking about controlling annuals with a herbicide, typically I'm going to use an herbicide that is going to be, and there's lots of different, people call them synthetic auxins or auxin mimics. And basically what an auxin mimic is it mimics the growth hormone auxin found in plants. Now we talk about rose bushes, you know, clipping the ends of rose bushes. When we clip that terminal bud off, that auxin, because we impact that auxin, we allow other buds to flush and start growing from that plant. And so we can increase bud break on that. And so what an auxin mimic does in a broadleaf plant, and again, this is a broadleaf plant, what that auxin does is it, in essence, grows that plant to death. So the smaller the plant is, the more tender the plant is, the faster growing the plant is, the easier it is for that auxin mimic to grow that plant to death. And so when I start seeing plants in the flowering stage, that's not in a growth phase. That is in a reproductive phase. And so using 2,4-D, dicamba, MCPP, carfentrazone, well, carfentrazone isn't, but the first three are all auxin mimics, and those auxin mimics grow this plant to death. So if I'm going to try and use an herbicide to control these, this needs to be done long before I see the flowers. And if I wait till I start seeing all the flowers and pretty colors on these, including the purple dead nettle that happens to be in this bunch, herbicide's not going to be very effective at this point in time. Most of the time I tell homeowners, when you're doing that, those are called revenge sprays. It may make you feel good, but you've really not addressed the problem. Go back and see Article 1. Try growing grass first, and then let's worry about the other broadleaf weeds second. Now, on the other hand, when we start dealing with a perennial, well, first, back to the chickweed and henbit, I would have wanted here on the plateau to either been spraying those in very early March, February, or in the fall of the year. And a lot of my cattle producers and such, just because like this past spring, as wet as it was and weather not conducive to getting out in fields or lawns for that matter, I like doing fall applications as late as I can go in the fall of the year. I can control much of those broadleaf plants when they're teeny tiny and they're very easy to control, and it doesn't take a lot of herbicide to impact those. That also goes hand in hand with controlling perennial type broadleaf weeds. Homeowners come in all the time and they say, you know, I've got a problem with wild violet or creeping Charlie and I can't get control of it, and I've sprayed it and I have no control over it. Well, the springtime is the absolute wrong time of year to try and control those perennial broadleaf weeds. And as far as that goes, any type of brush type, the spring of the year is the wrong time to control it. Those plants are pulling so much energy up through the root system. All that nutrient is flowing up and flowing out that through that cambium and phloem layers. And so those plants are really not moving any herbicides or any other nutrients for that matter down into the root system. So trying to control those plants in the spring of the year can be very, very ineffective to do. So what we like to do is tell people to focus on controlling those in the fall of the year, using those auxin mimics in the fall to spray these. At that point in time, all those plants are trying to channel energy down into the root system And so we can move that herbicide more effectively down into the root system. And just like Celeste, I've got a tractor going by my place, making a little bit more noise. But so we're going to use the auxin mimic to try and control these as well. Now, a lot of times when we're trying to focus on maybe not using an auxin mimic, 2,4-D dicamba NCP, brand names Trimec, Trimec Classic, Speed Zone, or just a few that we would see that would have those auxin mimics in it. There's other things that we can focus on in terms of controlling weeds in different settings beyond just our normal lawn. Now, when we start thinking about orchards and vineyards and gardens, that's a different measure. Now, when it comes to gardens, I would tell you your #1 control measure for weeds in a garden is called a gooseneck hoe. Getting out there, hoeing weeds. And I'm a homeowner, I'm not going to recommend any truly using herbicides. Now, from a commercial standpoint, when we've got farmers that are trying to grow large acreage vegetables for people, a lot of times it's just simply not practical to hand pull weeds or hoe weeds. But for the homeowner with a small vegetable garden, that's excellent exercise. It gets you in your garden. You can do a little bit more scouting when it comes to pest problems and things like that. So I would encourage you, just use a gooseneck hoe. Use cover crops, reduce the vegetation. Again, focus on growing plants, not necessarily killing plants. Now, to change gears though a little bit, when you can kind of look back over my shoulder here, and Natalie, you can tell me it's a little hard to see even on my monitor what all I'm looking at here. But we've got a blueberry patch here that basically in terms of weed control, I've done a small band of a burn down herbicide around it, whereas on my grapes, I've done a complete burn down on these grapes. Now, the burn down that I put on both of these basically was 2 weeks ago, a Sunday. And so what I've done is I've come in and I've used a non-selective herbicide, glyphosate, the dreaded Roundup, but I would, just like Celeste made the comment, be careful about using just Roundup, because they're making Roundup anymore that the active ingredient is not necessarily glyphosate, that it can be other broadleaf herbicides. And out here in our yard, really, I use no broadleaf herbicides whatsoever. No dicamba, no 2,4-D, and what broadleaf weeds that we've got. I don't use anything in the garden. However, in terms of the grapes, and you maybe could see it might be a little bit harder because I've cleaned up. Last year I did a very poor job in terms of trying to do I didn't do anything with vegetation. I let it go. And as a result, I had a lot of weeds and other pressures that came up in this vineyard. And so this year on my orchard, on the vineyard, I got in on it early to use that non-selective herbicide. Now, getting back to a little bit of the chemistry on that, a non-selective herbicide like glyphosate, and I'll specifically talk about glyphosate under whatever brand name, it only kills those plants that are green and growing, okay? It basically, if you've gone back or listened to Dr. Senseman's talk, or I would encourage you, if you didn't, look it up, that recording, glyphosate interrupts protein synthesis in green plants. And green growing plants, that's the only place that we find that protein synthesis pathway. And so glyphosate interrupts that protein synthesis pathway and goes to the roots, interrupts that, and that's how it kills the plants. When we put it on woody type material or plants, again, growing very vigorously in the spring, particularly perennials, a lot of times it can be a little harder to kill those. And so I can use glyphosate along these grapes and I can do a really good job. So 2 weeks of burn down on this vineyard floor here with glyphosate's done a great job. On the other hand, if you kind of look over to my right and you're looking at the blueberries, you say, well, man, there's a lot of vegetation growing under those. And the reason being is those blueberries or roots are very near the surface of the soil, and there was a lot of green shoots coming up in and around those and very tender. and I didn't want to personally get the glyphosate. I was too late in terms of the application, and rather than do the revenge spray with glyphosate, I let it go. And as a result, I'll just have to deal with the weeds. I actually need to use one of Celeste's recommendations and put down some mulch with that and try to control those. But in my apple orchard and in the vineyard, I've used that non-selective herbicide. Now I can do that on up until I start getting towards midsummer, and I don't want to use glyphosate at that time. Again, when we start getting those trees, they've kind of peak maturing, and then they're really sending lots of energy down into the root system. That's when I run the risk of translocating that herbicide down and possibly damaging those fruit trees or grapevines. So my goal is right now, I get it clean, but you know what? Come midsummer, these grapevines, while they may not look like it now, will be a matted Cambodian jungle of vines and vegetation. It will shade the floor under these. And so my plant, focusing on growing my plant, will actually cover that up, and it'll help me with the vegetation control on into the latter part of the year. Same with the apple trees that I'm growing. So using that non-selective herbicide can be very, very, very critical and important to doing a good job. Now, one of the last things I'll talk about, you know, in mulch, I really want to keep it bare soil under my apple trees and my grapes. Pine boles and working under those. I get a lot of shrubs that people bring in to the office that's actually been completely gnawed off by voles during the winter time that get in. And so we use bare soil as a method, one, to control voles in those orchards and vineyards, but also we don't want those competing for nutrients with that. And actually I had a few problematic weeds that were actually climbing vines that were climbing up into the grapes, so it creates a big problem. Now, one of the big things, everybody's like, well, how in the world you're spraying all this stuff, and what about pollinators? You're killing bees. 75 yards or less, 50 yards from where I'm standing, I've got a really nice big hive of bees out here. So I'm very aware, and I need the bees for pollination. I need them out here working these. And so I want to be aware and not use anything that'll damage them. But I don't want to cut my nose off and spite in my face. I'm going to try and use some chemistries where I need to control certain vegetation. But when I get into some of these turfs, again, I may just live with it. I'll focus on my grass. I won't worry about the broadleaf herbicides here. That all comes back to a personal preference and where you're at. But if you're one of these monoculture maniacs and wants the most beautiful lawn in the neighborhood, focus on growing your grass first. And then if you have a few problematic weeds, use some of those herbicides that I mentioned. There's some great publications that Dr. Baumgartner's already mentioned. Go online to UT Turf and look at some of those chemistries for controlling weeds as well. The one that she mentioned on choosing the correct herbicide, that is a great publication that goes in and explains a little bit of how those herbicides work. And I would tell you, understand what plant you're trying to kill and why you're trying to kill it, and then really choose the correct herbicide. And the last thing I'll say, if you use any of those herbicides, insecticides, fungicides, the label is the law. Whatever the label says, that's the only way to apply it. Myself, Dr. Baumgartner, Celeste, neither of us can tell you any different. The label is the law.
All right, thanks, Greg. We are right at 12 o'clock, and we've been having really good discussions in the chat box. So Greg and Celeste have both given you an overview of ornamental landscape bed, a little bit about turf, a little bit about fruits and vegetables. So this has been a really fun discussion. I thank both of them for having enough nerve to go outside, and we have kept our service pretty well. So I've just had my fingers crossed here the whole time. As we're getting ready to kind of sign off here, if you have any last minute questions that you want to put in the chat box, then by all means, go ahead and put them in. But I want to give Greg and Celeste both just a little bit of a chance to add in the extra comments or kind of sign us off here.
I will say that I realized as Greg was talking that I never told anybody what this look-alike weed was called. the one that the leaves may look like clover to you. It's actually an oxalis. So a lot of you might be familiar with that. There are some ornamental oxalis that we use in the landscape and container planting as well, but this is the weedy one. So just wanted to throw that in there.
Oh, one quick thing, I talked about those herbicides, broadleaf. Those herbicides that Celeste was mentioning a minute ago are basically designed to kill grass weeds. Boy, make certain that you read the labels and make certain that you know whether or not it is approved for your turf or your bed, because again, grassy weeds, and a lot of times the biggest difference on those grass weeds and controlling those, like barricade pendimethalin, has a really, really long active, so it'll control weeds over a long period of time compared to some of the others. Now, the one about the wild garlic, is it a weed or is it a grass weed or a broadleaf? It actually acts as a broadleaf, and so our 2,4-D herbicides will work very effective in terms of controlling wild garlic.
And I'm glad you asked about the wild garlic. I get questions about wild garlic control in ornamental plantings, and unfortunately, there are no good solutions because it's dangerous to use some of those 2,4-D or other broadleaf specific post-emerge chemicals in an established ornamental planting. So I don't have any good information, any good advice on controlling that other than try to, I guess, pull them out.
Yeah, I tell people, if you in broadleaf plantings, you can easily control grass. In grass plantings, you can easily control broadleaf weeds.
Mm-hmm.
It's very, very challenging, and really there's nothing for a homeowner other than using your hands and a hoe. When you've got grass weeds and grass plantings, there is no options. When you've got broadleaf weeds and broadleaf plantings, you don't have many options. Go to the right herbicide. It'll talk about some of those. Just understand your options are going to be very, very limited.
Yeah.
All right, we got a question in the chat box about whether I was going to be recording and putting this on YouTube, and I absolutely am. I have all of your email addresses because you've all done a great job of signing up, and what I'm going to do is when I get that recording done, I'll send out the link for the YouTube, as well as some of these other publications. Gregg referenced a great presentation on some herbicide use presentation that Dr. Sinsman gave a couple of weeks ago, so I'll include that. So we'll give you as much additional resource information as we can. And I just want to say thanks to Gregg and Celeste as we sign off here, and thank you all especially for joining in. We're so glad to have your participation. It was a lot of fun to interact with everybody in the chat box, and we look forward to seeing you next Tuesday, same time, same place, and we are going to go on some wildflower hikes, which is actually really timely. Several of our favorite parks and natural areas are closed for this year, and so we are going to, between Justin and Rachel and myself, we're going to take you on some of our favorite hikes and get you all primed up for some new spots to go next year. So, so once again, thanks everybody, and